this port, now of course, after this port command is received, the server acknowledges this. Next, in active mode, you already know that the server initiates the data connection. So what the server is going to do is it's going to take this port value n+1, and it's going to initiate a connection from the FTP data port on the server. So this is the data connection, and of course the client sends back an acknowledgement. So now you can see that the control session has been initiated by the client, but the data session has been initiated by the server. So as you can see, these are the two modes of FTP operation: passive mode and active mode. Again, recap: passive mode, both the connections, the control and the data connections are initiated by the client. In active mode, the control connection is initiated by the client, but the data connection is initiated by the server. Great. Now let's go ahead and see how this affects our topology, and how the ASA sitting in between the FTP client and server must adapt in order to allow both FTP client and server means of operation. All right. As you can see here in the topology, this is going to be our firewall with the inside and the outside interfaces, and the FTP client and the FTP server. Here you can see that the FTP client is on the inside network and the FTP server is on the outside network. So let's go ahead and trace through the exchanges in the protocol and see how the ASA should be configured in order to handle. First, let's go ahead with passive mode. Here in passive mode, what happens is the first control session is initiated by the FTP client. This is going to be the PASV command, if you can recall. Now the FTP client initiates this between port N and port 21. This passive will tell the FTP server that, hi, I'm a client and I want to run passive mode FTP. So you must open another port X and send me that port so that I can use that port number in order to open the next data connection if I want to transfer any data. Great. Now what the FTP server does is, as soon as this receives, as you can see, this traffic goes from the inside to the outside, so this travels without any configuration. I mean, it's from the higher to lower security levels. Now the server opens up port X, and now it sends a connection. It sends a message back to N saying, hey, I've opened port X for you. Now comes the problem. As you can see, there is an access list. There is a default access list on the outside interface, which is a deny IP any. Now this command, since this is not being inspected, this is going to be dropped because this does not match the access. This does not match the access list here. So what you have to do, and okay, here's one. You can say, hey, okay, you know what? I'm going to just put a permit IP any. You're going to say, I'm going to put a permit IP any access list here, so this command should be allowed in, right? Well, yes, it is going to be allowed in, but the ASA is not going to look into the data and figure out what the value of port X is. Because of that, the connection will fail, because when it's trying to open the data port, the data coming back in will not be allowed because this port X is not being inspected by the firewall. The firewall, when you enable FTP inspection, it looks into the data and it figures out, okay, I see a passive command going out and I see a port command coming in. So what the server understands that this port X is going to be used for the data connection later on for the FTP client to transfer data to the server. So without FTP inspection running on the firewall will not understand that X is being used for the data connection, and the data will not be permitted in. So now let's go ahead and assume that we have enabled FTP inspection here. So the server sees the port X command and it understands that the FTP server has opened up port X for the client. Next, the client opens up port N+1 and connects using the data connection to port X. This is allowed by default because it's going from the higher to lower security levels. Now, the return traffic which contains the data is not allowed unless you enable FTP inspection, because that is how the firewall understand that when the traffic is coming back from port X, that's going to be the FTP data traffic corresponding to this control session, and I need to allow it back. So for FTP passive mode to work, you need FTP inspection to be enabled on the firewall. Now, FTP inspection can be enabled either on an interface or globally. On an interface, it does not matter which interface you enable it on because it's bidirectional. But on the if you enable it globally, it works ingress, so it is going to inspect the FTP packets on the inside interface. So great. Now we have understood how the firewall impacts FTP passive mode transfer. So let me recap, because this can be a little confusing. Assume that there is a permit IPNE. There is a deny IPNE a default access list on the outside interface. So first, the client from the inside sends over a passive command to the FTP server sitting on the outside. Now the FTP server sees this as a passive mode connection, opens up port X, and sends back the port X connection. Now, we need to enable FTP inspection on the ASA for this particular reason. The ASA needs to look into this packet and figure out that port X is going to be used for the data connection. Now, after this packet goes back to the FTP client, N+1 port is going to be used to open up the data connection to the port X, and the return traffic is going to be allowed because, as you can remember in the earlier step, FTP inspection was enabled and it knows that port X is now being used for the data transmission, and it needs to be allowed to send traffic back. Great, that's passive mode. Now let's have a look at active mode. Alright, in active mode, I'm going to be using the same topology again. The client is on the inside, the server is on the outside. I don't have anything configured on the ASA, so by default it's going to deny all the traffic coming in from the outside. So let's have a look at how the active mode transfer is going to happen. First, the client is going to open up port N and port N+1. It's going to send the data. Sorry, let me put that here. Port N and port N+1. Now the client is going to initiate. Remember, the client always initiates the TCP control or the FTP control session, because the server doesn't know when the client wants to open a session, so the client has to initiate it. The client opens up an FTP control session to the FTP server running on port 21, and instead of a passive command, because this is active mode, it sends the port command indicating the data port which it is using for transfer. So it's going to send a port N+1. Now this traffic goes from the inside to the outside by default. Now the server knows that port N+1 traffic is received. Now what it does is it sends back an acknowledgement to this. Now this is going to be blocked if this is not permitted in the access list, or if this traffic is not being inspected. But you know what? Even if this is not there, as long as you have not enabled strict FTP inspection on the ASA, it doesn't matter. What the server needs is the server needs data that the port N+1 is open for the N. For the client is using port N+1. That's all the server needs to know. Now what the server is going to do is it's going to use its data port 20, and it's going to initiate a data connection to the newly acquired port N+1. This is going to be the data. Now this is going to be blocked by the firewall. Why? Because from the traffic from the higher to the lower security, from lower to higher is blocked by default. So a simple fix is required for this to work. Does anyone know why? Yeah, all you need to do is put an access list entry on the outside interface, which is just going to permit data coming in from port 20. That's all you have to do, because after this data is sent, the return is just going to be the acknowledgement, which again is going to be transferred by default. But even if it's not, it's fine. Now this data which is going to be transferred is checked by this access list.